And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight's episode, we're going to be joined by my guest, Laura. Now, Laura has reached out to me within the past week about some experiences she had growing up. She wanted to have an opportunity to share those while she still can, and I was more than grateful to have her on here to talk to me about it. I know it's pretty hard and traumatic for some people to share some of these experiences they've went through, but I do appreciate everyone that does. I know it's not easy. So with Laura and coming on here and sharing her experiences, I know it's going to be a little hard for her, but I do appreciate that. Before we bring her on, if you've ever had an experience or a story you'd like to share and you would like to be a guest of Tinfoil Tales, please send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Either way works for me. Just make sure you get your message to me and we'll get something scheduled for a future episode. You can also find me on Facebook. Look for Brandon Tinfoil Tales. You can reach me that way too. We'll get something scheduled through that. If you'd like to help the podcast out, please continue to share it around. For everyone out there sharing the podcast, I truly appreciate you guys. It's bringing more eyes and ears of the podcast. You can also help out by leaving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to Tinfoil Tales at. I know I say that every episode, but it does really help. If you would like to join the Patreon, that is an option you can look into. There is a free tier. There's also the paid tier, which is $1.99 a month. You get access to all of the episodes way early, ad-free, and you get some of the bonus content like Crinkled Conspiracies, the Patreon exclusive show that Ed and I do together. There's some other things on there too, like the live videos and some other stuff in the works. Again, that's only $1.99 a month for the paid tier, so less than $2. You get all that content and access to all the episodes right after they're done recorded. I will be appearing at several different events this fall, I've said in previous episodes. First one is September 14th, the Bigfoots and Brews and Spirits 2 and Sister Lakes Brewing Company up in Dowagiac, Michigan. September 27th and 28th at the Indiana Bigfoot Conference down in Nashville, Indiana. October 19th at Miami County 4-H Fairgrounds for the ParaUnity 6 Paranormal Convention. There's also October 26th for the Crawfordsville Paranormal Convention in Crawfordsville, Indiana. More information about those are included in the show notes. And as always, make sure to follow me on social media. I mentioned earlier, Brandon Tinfoil Tales. It's the profile I've been using for Tinfoil Tales now on Facebook. There's also the Instagrams where I'm most active. You can reach out to me on either one of those. Give me a follow. Keep up with Tinfoil Tales. But now it's time to bring Laura on. Again, I know this is not easy for people to come on and talk about certain things. But for those that do, I truly do believe that they are helping others by letting them hear that they're not the only ones that have experienced these weird things. So for that, I'm grateful. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take time to welcome my guest today, Laura. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
No, you're welcome. It's good to be on.
You want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm a 65-year-old stay-at-home mom, and I have 4 grown kids and 4 grandkids. And my youngest son is bedridden. He's 25. And I pretty much stay home and take care of him most of the time.
You reached out to me. You said you had some experiences and stuff, and I don't know if you want to jump into it right away, but if you want to give a little explanation as to what the experiences kind of entail before we dive into it, you can.
Okay. I've had a lot of supernatural experiences, I guess you could say, starting at age 5 in 1963. And they were a surprise to me, and not something I sought out, of course, because I was a little kid. But it kind of went through my whole life. Every few years, another interaction would happen. And so I grew up knowing that UFOs and other beings are real, but I always felt like I shouldn't talk about it, like I wasn't allowed to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did try, finally at 9, after a very intense abduction, my parents at first said, "Oh, that was just a dream, you had a dream." And my sister was standing behind me saying, "No, that's not everything that happened." And my mom was like, "No, this is Laura's dream. You can't tell what happened in her dream." And I was like, "No, she can, because it was real."
Yeah.
And eventually my dad was leaving for work, so my mom said, "Do you think she does know something?" And that phrase, what she said, always stuck in my mind. Why would she say it that way? Do you think she does know something?
Mm-hmm.
So I have always felt that it's been a generational experience. But my parents and grandparents were the kind of people that didn't talk about important things in front of kids or scary things or whatever. So I'm from that generation where adults don't talk to children much. So it took me and I was very shy as a kid, so it took me a long time to be able to actually talk about it. And now that the government is coming clean a little bit, I feel like it's just time to confirm some things and get it out there, because people really do need to know.
Yeah. Now, do you think, when you say your mom said that, do you think they've experienced it too? Did you ever talk to your mom about that or anything?
Not until a few years before she died. And the one thing she did say after I told her my whole story was, "Oh my God, now I know what happened to your sister when she was like 4 years old, because her personality changed overnight." And I told my mom what happened, and she was floored. She says, "Now I understand better why she changed." Because if you want me to tell the first abduction experience.
Yeah, that's fine. You can go into it.
Okay. I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and my grandpa was like a professor at the University of Arkansas and everything. And my dad was a psychology major. My mom was a maternity ward nurse. And then after college, my dad decided to go into the military. So my grandma said, "Well, before you move away, I want to take the girls to church. And, I know that once you leave, you'll never take them to church. So I just want them to go with me once." So my parents said, okay. And instead of sending us to the nursery school room, she brought us up into the pews with her. And we heard the most powerful, intense hell and damnation preaching I've ever heard in my life. Like, still to this day, I've never heard it like that. And at 4 years old, I was just like, wow, this is real. This is true. It didn't scare me like a lot of kids would get scared, but this felt like the truth to me. God and Jesus, hell is real, heaven is real, and it just always stuck with me. So my dad went into the military, we moved away, went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then we went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then they stationed my dad up in Fairbanks, Alaska. So we were up there for about 2 years. I went to nursery school and kindergarten there. And I was not only very shy, but sort of like an old soul my whole life, and just an observer, like sit back and watch things rather than participate. And I remember thinking on the playground one day, all these kids were running towards me and I'm standing in the sidelines. And they're flailing their arms and screaming like kids do, you know? And I had this thought, don't those children know how foolish they look? And then I kind of stopped myself and I said, wait a minute, I'm only 5 years old too. I'm supposed to be kind of acting like them. But I just had this sense of being more of an observer, taking things in. And so we were up there in Fairbanks during the big earthquake that hit Anchorage. And it actually reached all the way to Fairbanks and rocked our house back and forth like we were on a boat. And it was kind of early in the morning, and it was rocking so far side to side that the curtains on the living room window were swinging out into the room about a foot. And then when the house would tip back, it would go the other way and the curtains would press against the window. And that's just how far the house was rocking. And so it was during that year, and I'm not sure if it happened before or after the earthquake, but at that point, the sun was up most of the time, 24/7. It doesn't set that time of year. So we had heavy blackout curtains through the whole house to, kind of pretend that it's nighttime so you can sleep. And one night, while I was laying in bed, my sister's bed was pushed up against mine. So I was near the wall and she was near the outside. My parents were in bed sleeping. My sister was asleep. And I noticed something move past my door, and like a shadow. And then all of a sudden, somebody pulled back the curtain and light flooded the hallway so I could see really well. And I noticed that there were 4 or 5 small gray beings, people, I thought. And they had light gray skin and big slanted black eyes and a large head, and they were very skinny. And I was just so surprised. I'm just staring at them, and next thing I knew, I see the blankets pull off my sister with like an invisible force. I'm going to call it an invisible force because I couldn't see anything moving them. And all of a sudden, she was lifted up out of bed and put in a standing position above the floor, a few inches above the floor. And I looked at her and her eyes were still closed, like she was still sound asleep. And so I'm watching this, and she was moved, hovering above the floor in a standing position out of our bedroom door and over towards the top of the stairs. And next thing I know, the blankets are sliding off me with no visible means of how it's happening, but they're sliding off of me. And I was also lifted up into a standing position and sort of hovered out the door the same way. And they had taken my sister downstairs already. And they stopped me at the top of the stairs. And I knew in my mind, in order to go downstairs, you have to lift your feet and step down the steps, right? So I'm trying to move my legs that way, but I'm spinning like bicycle motion in midair because I'm hanging in midair. So my legs are going, run, like I'm trying to walk down the stairs. And the being next to me said, "You don't have to do that. We'll do that for you." And I heard him. I could see his mouth wasn't moving. I heard him in my mind. So I stopped moving my legs, and he kind of hovered me down the stairs, but not touching the stairs. I mean, we were above the stairs, but we were going down at an angle. And as soon as we went into the living room, I saw my sister ahead of me and one of the gray beings move into the dining area. And then once you get in the dining area, you can go through the kitchen and out the front door. So we're moving very slowly, and I looked at this being next to me and I thought, wow, he's shorter than my mom. And my mom was 5'2", and my dad was 6'2". So I knew this being was shorter than my mom. And I asked him, "Are you people like us?" And he said to me, "No, we are non-human living beings." And that really, stuck in my mind too. And then we're being hovered out in towards the dining room. And at that point, I have some missing time. And I just remember that my sister's personality changed from that, day forward. And in talking to my mom years later, we figured out that she probably woke up during the abduction and freaked out and just panicked and couldn't take it. Because, when you're in a dream, you can kind of fight it and you can wake up and, I'm here in my bed. But in this situation, although I was awake observing it, she woke up probably during the abduction and freaked out. She was only 4 years old at that time. And he was 5. And that was 1963. And we weren't exposed to a lot. We were very sheltered. We didn't watch a lot of TV and go anywhere. We never had people over. I found out years later that my father had had a traumatic experience as a child where he lost his best friend during a sleepover. They were goofing around in the bathtub, and his friend fell and smashed his head on the old clawfoot tub and died in front of my father. So our whole childhood, we never had birthday parties. We never went to sleepovers. We never had people over to our house because he was so terrified. He didn't want to be responsible for us or any other child being hurt or killed.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, so it was really traumatic, but I never knew that. My whole life, I always wondered, why don't we have birthday parties? Why don't we have, company? It was kind of strange. I didn't know any better, really. It just seemed not quite normal. But my father was, like I said, he was in the military, so he was a marksman. He became a captain. And this was around the time Vietnam was really getting going. So his superior officer told him that, everybody was going to get shipped over to Vietnam. Do you want to get out now or do you want to go with us? And my mom didn't want him to go. So he got out of the Army and we took a long drive down through Canada to Iowa and moved down there, where my dad got a job in corrections, and he was more in the personnel department, like hiring and firing prison guards and personnel. So we lived in about 4 different towns in Iowa. It was Des Moines, Davenport, Anamosa, and McGregor. And by the time we got to McGregor, he had been offered a position as a warden of a small minimum security prison camp. And it was so minimum security that my sister and my mom and I would go visit him at work. And so here we are in this, prison camp right along the muddy Mississippi. And it was surrounded by woods. There were hardly any houses around. But they had this giant workshop for the prisoners, and my mom would trade recipes with the cook, and, Washington, I think, was the name. And, it was kind of cool. And I have a lamp to this day that one of the prisoners made for me, and another one made one for my sister, and it still works. But, we had a lot of cool experiences like that. And one night a prisoner got loose, and we literally went out in the cars searching for the guy. We're all yelling out the windows, "Where are you? Come back." And he eventually came back, and my dad asked him why he came back. And he said, "Well, I just got cold, hungry, and tired." So, let's see, after we were in Iowa, my dad left that job and we moved to Delavan, Wisconsin, where he was doing personnel work in another prison. And let's see, I think it was, I forgot when I was 7 in Iowa, when we first were in like maybe the second house we lived in, was the second abduction. And I remember waking up outside at night, and I was hovering over my house in the dark. And at first I thought I was dreaming, but then I saw, the roof of the house. I could see the swing set down in the yard, and there was a deep ravine behind the house. And I could see all that from above. And next thing I knew, I'm going down towards the sliding glass doors in the back of the living room. And at that point, I felt kind of like I was still dreaming, like it was a dream. But then I felt myself being laid on my bed face first. And all of a sudden, there was a huge smack on my butt. And it scared me. And I came fully awake. And I was laying there terrified. And I realized that my nightgown was pulled up to my waist. And I was like thinking, oh, thank God my underwear is still on. And the smack, like it stung. And I was never spanked as a child. So it shocked me. And I was just laying there all tensed up. And I heard a strange sound, and it was like my mother wore these leather loafers, back in those days in the 60s, they were popular. And they made a lot of noise on the wooden floor. So all of a sudden, instead of her normal footsteps, I hear as if it was her shoes being slapped on the floor by someone else. Or her, I didn't know, but instead of normal walking sounds, it was as if someone was pretending to make shoes walk on the floor. And so I'm listening as they go out the room into my parents' room. I heard the closet door slide open, and there was like a clattering as if someone had dropped them from like 3 feet above the floor. And I thought, well, that's not my parents, because they were both like very neat perfectionists, and they would never just drop their shoes like that. And then the closet door slid shut. And next thing I heard was very strange. Now, a lot of my experiences, I've heard other people tell similar stories, so I can relate to a lot of, things that other people have gone through. But some of the things I've been through, I've never heard anyone else talk about. So what happened next to me was I'm laying there, still on my stomach, terrified, and I hear this weird, almost like a robotic conversation. And you got to remember, back in the 60s, we didn't have push-button phones. We had one little black and white TV where you turn the knob and it's like a clunk clunk to change the channels. We didn't have anything but a rotary dial phone, one in the house. So there were not noises like that in our lives back then. But it was like one would say, bip, pop, boop, ding, whir. And then it would pause. And then another one would answer it with similar weird noises. And I was just floored. Like, what is that? And I waited and waited and waited because it stopped after like 5 minutes. And finally I saw the sun coming up. So I got up the courage to scramble up under the covers and turn around so I could see the room. And I saw my sister was still sleeping in her bed. And for weeks after that, I was like nervous and jumpy, always looking behind my back, didn't know what had happened. And I remember sitting at the dining table one night and I kept looking back at the sliding glass door. And my mom said, "What is wrong? Why are you keep looking like that at the door?" Then I said, "Can I please move my chair so that my back is against the wall so I can see what's coming?" And she said, "Sure, if it makes you feel better." So we all scooted around the table and I kept my back to the wall because I was still nervous, but I couldn't feel like I could tell them what happened. And then after that was when we moved to McGregor and my dad became the warden and all that. So I'm nervous, so I'm gonna forget a few things. But
You're okay.
okay. At 9 years old in Delavan was one of the more dramatic experiences where we were in a second-story craftsman-like house in town, and one night I woke up and I saw a very bright light outside my bedroom window, and my window was cracked open a couple inches for fresh air. And I thought, oh, what did they do? Build a new street light right by our driveway? Now, it just didn't make sense. So all of a sudden I hear this voice. It was like an electronic little girl's voice say, and it was creepy. It was like, do you see the light? Do you want to come out and play in the light? And I thought, no, I have school tomorrow. Who is that, And the light stayed there, so I eventually got up out of bed and walked to the window to look out. And I could see the light was actually coming from the right where our garage was. And I look up and I saw something dark, like a large dark circle hanging above our garage, and it was blocking out the stars. Couldn't see anything above it or on top of it, but there was a beam of light coming down from it. And it was strange because it wasn't like when you shine a flashlight, you see like the light radiates out to the sides. This looked almost like there were invisible walls around the light that wouldn't let it go any farther than the beam that it was in, which was really weird. But as I'm standing there trying to figure what this was, I felt my body start tingling all over. And I felt it kind of buzzing. And it literally felt like every cell in my body was being vibrated apart, just taken apart cell by cell and separated. And the next thing I felt was being lifted up and moved literally through the glass and the wooden frame of the window. And I found myself on the other side of my bedroom window on the second floor, hovering in the air, second story height above my garage, or in front of my garage above the driveway. And I felt myself being put back together. And it was like my spirit was aware of the whole thing, but my body was being taken apart and put back together. And then I started moving forward up into this beam of light, and it was sort of moving me off to the left side of this circle thing. And there was a little kind of like a hatch door in the bottom of it next to the beam of light. And I was moved up into that, up into a hallway. And I was turned so that there was like a wall in front of me, but then I was turned to the right. And the inside of it was like some weird, shiny kind of stainless steel interior or something. Like it was metallic walls. And I noticed that if you moved too far to the right, you would hit your head because the wall curved up. Like an arch kind of a thing. And I started, I was being hovered down the hallway, and I noticed to my left there were like 3 doorways. And when I looked into each doorway, it looked like the rooms were pie-shaped, like a slice of pie, with like the door cut out in the crust side, and like imagine a bite taken off the end of the slice of pie. I don't know if you can picture that, but that's how the rooms were shaped. Like a pie slice with a, flat wall where the pointy part should be. So I was moved past 2 doors and onto a third one. And I thought they were going to make me go straight ahead, and because straight ahead was a bigger room. And all it had in it was like a couple tiny chairs, what looked like little screens or windows or something, and a couple little knobs or controls or something, and there wasn't much in there. But it was a bigger room. And instead of going in that room, they turned me to the left to the last door. And there was a metal table, kind of like a doctor's exam table in there. And they laid me on the table. And I was still just kind of observing what was going on. And then as I'm laying there, I felt something evil in the room. And I was never exposed to a lot of negative, evil, anything. But I knew in my heart that was evil behind me. And I needed to know what it was. So I turned my head backwards and to the left so that I could see what was back behind me at the head of the table. And there were two of the gray beings on either side of a large, solid black praying mantis. Solid black like an ant. The whole thing. And that is where the evil was coming from. And I felt as if it was the leader, like it was giving orders to the gray beings. And my eyes got huge, and I turned my face back. And I said, I am not looking at that thing again. I was really terrified. And then I noticed near my feet, the one wall that was between this room and the big one that I thought I was going to go into, the entire wall was made up of what looked like fish tanks stacked on top of each other. Then they filled the entire wall, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. But they were emanating a blue light, like a light, sort of between cobalt blue and turquoise blue, but it was a beautiful blue light emanating from each one. And that calmed me down for some reason. So I laid there for a while, and I don't remember how long it was. I have no idea. But next thing I know, there was what looked like a little girl gray being in the doorway. And I looked right at her in the eyes, and she looked like the grays, but she had slightly smaller eyes. They were still slanted and black, solid black. But she had long, thin, wispy black hair. And I felt like she was telling me that she was my sister. And I was thinking, well, if she's my sister, then my parents have to be her parents or something. I didn't quite understand, but I was thinking she doesn't look like my sister that I know. Because Barb had short, mousy brown hair and blue eyes and a turned up nose and a round face. And I had long dark hair and green eyes, and I was thinner. So this gray being telling me that she's my sister, it was sort of like a calming, comforting effect. But I felt somehow that my parents had to have been involved. So next thing I know, I'm being taken back into my bedroom, and I'm hovering above the bed. And they laid me down on my stomach, and I could feel my left leg being pulled up so that my knee was sticking out, and my left arm pulled up to the side, and my head turned to the left. And I heard a voice tell me, from now on, you will have trouble sleeping. And if you put yourself in this position, it will help you fall asleep. And ever since then, I've had severe insomnia. And if I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping, I will get in that position, and it does help me sleep. But the very next morning, I stopped my dad at the door before he left for work, and my mom was there, and my sister came down behind me on the stairs. And that's when I was trying to tell them, I have to tell you what happened last night. And they were trying to tell me it was just a dream, it was just a nightmare. And that's when my sister chimed in and said, no, that's not everything. And I had thought that she was asleep the whole time. And my parents were asleep. So I didn't even know how she was trying to, fill in my story. But I learned years later, and once I finally started talking about it, I told my boyfriend at the time first, and then my sister. And one night we were driving to one of his gigs. He was in a band, and me and my sister and my oldest son, Morgan, and Steve were all in the car. And for some reason, I felt like I had to tell that experience of when I was 9. So I tell the whole thing just like I told you. And after I'm done, I'm feeling stupid. Oh, they don't believe me, whatever. I shouldn't have said it. And I'm feeling embarrassed. And it was like dead quiet for like a solid minute. And all of a sudden, my sister says from the back seat, "Oh my God, I remember that night." And I spun around. I said, "You do? I thought you were sleeping." She says, "No." She woke up to a bright white light, got out of bed, went into my room, and I wasn't there. She couldn't find me. And so she says she went into our parents' room and tried to wake them up, but when she touched them, they were like a rock. Like she couldn't even move them, and she couldn't tell if they were breathing or not. And she got scared, and she ran downstairs in the dark, out the front door, looking, because she saw that light through the windows. And she's told me that she was standing in our driveway in her nightgown with bare feet, stomping on the concrete driveway, yelling up at the circle above the garage with the light beaming down. She said she was yelling, "Don't take her. Don't take her. Take me. I'll fight back and she won't." And that just floored me when she said that. I had no idea she had woken up and not been able to find me. So after that, she tried to help me deal with it, and she didn't remember any other experiences herself. But I did go down to New York City. I got the chance to be interviewed by Bud Hopkins years ago, almost 30 years. It was like 30 years ago now. And he hypnotized me. And back then I was so shy still that the hypnosis kind of didn't work, because he made the mistake of telling me after I was under, I could hear him say, "Oh, you don't have to talk if you don't want to." And that was a big mistake. Because me being shy and not normally wanting to talk to anybody, I just clammed up and I barely said a thing unless he asked me a question.
I've always been a little hesitant with hypnosis anyways, because sometimes I wonder if they can't unintentionally implant something and make
in
you
your
think.
mind.
Yeah.
I hear you. I was always nervous about it too, but I wanted to try it because I wanted answers. Like, I still have more questions than answers, All I know is that I remember my experiences and they've never changed. Like, my memories have never changed. So, but, nothing ever came of that because he was busy doing movies and books and whatever. But it was interesting because when he was interviewing me before the hypnosis, he said, "Did you ever see that Travis Walton movie? What is it, Fire in the Sky?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I saw it once." He goes, "Well, tell me what you thought in the movie was real compared to your experiences, and what, if anything, do you think was not real?" So I told him, I said, "Well, for me personally, I didn't believe the glasses and garbage floating around the spaceship, and I didn't believe the goopy slime kind of cocoon things that they were in." And so when I got done telling him what I thought, he said, "You're absolutely right. Everything that you just mentioned that you didn't feel right about was put in by Hollywood to dramatize everything. And the rest of it was Travis's true story." I said, "Wow." And I really believe, Brandon, that if we don't tell the truth exactly as we know it and experience it, how is anybody ever going to research it or know the truth?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see what dramatizing things and making up corny things for effect that does not help the cause at all.
Hollywood's not trying to help anyone. They're just trying to make money.
Yeah, I totally agree. Absolutely.
I did have a question though about your sister. You said her behavior changed, like her personality changed.
Yeah.
Like, what happened with that?
Well, the weird thing was, being 5, I don't remember her being anything but a, quiet little kid as, youngster. But after that, and my mom said to me too, once I finally told her, she said, my sweet baby turned into a rebellious, angry brat. Like she couldn't control her. She was moody, angry, bitchy. She just totally changed. And she's still to this day, she's kind of hard to get along with. And, it really did change her. My mom knew that. But she actually said to me, I thought your father might have molested her that night. I said, oh no, it was worse than that. And told her all the details that I remembered. So she believes that Barb was just woken up in the middle of it and traumatized. And
The
another weird,
whole thing's with abductions. And I know it is a very gray, slippery area to go down, but a lot of people do tend to think that these abductions aren't abductions. It's just the mind's way of covering up some other traumatic
you know,
events. That seems to be
right?
the explanation you get from most of the mainstream doctors and everything else. They say the mind's coping with
Yeah,
traumatic events, and this is how we manifest it.
right. Well, you know what? Tell me how millions of people manifest the same cover.
You know,
How is that possible? How do we all see the grays? And I have a friend now in Canada that I met on a UFO type site, and we were commenting back and forth and became Facebook friends. He lives up in Canada. When I told him my story, he said, wow, he had his one and only abduction that he remembers in 1963, same year when I was 5, he was like 8. But in 1963, he was in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. And he said that he had a nightmare and he woke up. And normally when he would call for his parents, they would come into his room and comfort him, get him back to sleep. But that night they did not come to him. And he said he turned around with his head at the foot of the bed so that he could see the stairs going downstairs. And what he saw scared the hell out of him. He said, a gray being, described just like what I saw. Large head, black slanted eyes, skinny body. He said it was coming up the stairs at him, towards him. And he closed his eyes really tight. And he felt like a cold touch on his temple, like a cold, cold finger. And he was just terrified. And many years later, he had a precancerous lesion removed from that temple area, exactly where he was touched as a kid. So, how do you explain stuff like that?
no,
And my sister and I, in like a year apart as adults, we both had our thyroids removed. And mine was just turning cancerous. And I asked my doctor, I said, what causes thyroid cancer? And she said, well, we believe it's exposure to high radiation. And I'm like,
where'd you get the high radiation exposure from?
exactly. Could it possibly be from the abductions? That's always been in my mind. But I had other abductions when I was about 12 is the next one that I remember. 12, 13. We were living in Chicago suburbs, Wheeling. And my parents had gotten divorced when they lived in Delavan. So we were with our mom and stepfather for a while, but he was a bad alcoholic. So we moved in with our dad in Chicago and his new wife. And after they split up, my sister and I each took one of the bedrooms and my dad would sleep on the couch. Now one night, I was wide awake, going to listen to a radio show. I think the radio station was reading the Hobbit book, the story of the Hobbit, over the night, like for an hour every night, something like that. So I was looking forward to that, and I had my overhead light on. My closet doors were closed. I had the bifold sliding doors. There was a light in the closet, but it was off, and I was wide awake. I went in the bathroom, brushed my teeth, got ready for bed. And I'm like, oh boy, I'm going to, go listen to The Hobbit now. So I open my door, and I see that my bedroom light is off. And I see that my closet light was on. I'm like, that's not how I left it. And as soon as I stepped into my room, I suddenly was hit with this exhaustion, like really tired. And I had to struggle to walk over to my bed, and I kind of flopped down on my bed. And I'm like, why am I so tired? And why is the closet light on? And next thing I know, I see the closet door slide open. And I thought, oh, my sister's in there. She's trying to scare me. But why am I so tired? And I see stepping out of my closet one of the great beings. And it's coming towards me. And then I passed out or something. Because the next thing I remember was being hovered down in the middle of the night above the condos and being brought through the front door into my room. And that's all I remember of that abduction. But then I got mono and got really sick and basically dropped out of school because I was sick for months. And I tried going to night school and working in a factory during the day, and it was really hard on me. I was drained and all the time. And instead of graduating high school, I got married instead at 16 and, moved to New York. But in between that, when I was 15, I had a boyfriend, and he wanted to go up to Milwaukee to see Pink Floyd in a concert at a baseball stadium. So we went up the night before and stayed in a hotel, and we got there really early because he wanted good seats close to the stage, and there was about 100 of us standing in this hot, sunny parking lot all day waiting for the concert to open at like 7 at night. So we all got sunburned and dehydrated, and it was a long day. So by the time the concert started, put out a blanket on the infield, we're sitting there in front of the stage, and I just felt so wiped out. I laid down. Next thing I know, I felt like I sat up. And I'm like, I feel better, but why am I sitting up? And then I started floating up far away. The music faded away, and I could see the stars in front of me, and I'm going way up into the stars. And the next thing I know, I saw this beautiful being of light coming towards me. And it was in the shape of a man with long hair and wearing golden robes, and he was glowing from the inside out like it was a nightlight or something. And he just kept getting closer and closer and bigger, and until he got close to me, and I said, "Is God real?" And he said, "Yes." And I ended up hanging in the stars out there, talking to Jesus for quite a while. And he was telling me wisdom and all these things, these amazing things. And when he told me I had to return to my body, I was ready. Like, oh, okay, now I'm armed with the truth. I can go back and tell people the truth and what God wants from us and all this. And he said, no, you won't be allowed to remember everything that we just talked about. And my heart sank. And I said, please, Lord, let me remember one thing. What one thing can I take back with me? And he said, remember this. Remain humble. And I said, okay. And I turned around and I saw below me the earth far away like a beach ball hanging in the sky. And it was beautiful. And I could tell the sun was off to my left because the earth, the left half of the earth was brightly lit by the sun, and the right half of the earth was dark, like it was nighttime. And I said, how am I going to find my body? And the Lord said, follow the silver cord. And I looked down at my waist, and there was a long, shiny, like an umbilical cord from my spiritual waist, waving all the way, winding down to earth. And so I started plunging down to earth, feet first. And the whole way down, I'm going, remain humble, remain humble, remain humble. And God is real. And I just kept repeating that the whole way down. And I'm thinking, oh, wait, it was nighttime when I left, so I have to go to the dark side of the earth. That's where night is. So I'm getting closer and closer and closer. Next thing I know, I'm above the baseball stadium. And I noticed that the concert was still going on. Could see all the people in there. And I saw all the cars lined up like matchbox cars in an L-shaped parking lot. And I didn't know that when I was on the ground. I couldn't see that, that it was an L-shaped parking surrounding the stadium. So I get closer and closer, and I see my body laying next to my boyfriend. He's sitting up watching the concert, and I'm just there looking like I'm sleeping. But I go down, 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 and I laid down into my body. And I woke up, and I opened my eyes, and I felt so heavy. Like these bodies are a burden to carry around. They're so heavy. And I stirred around, and my boyfriend said, oh, you're alive. He goes, we thought you died there for a minute. And I'm like, no, I'm here, but I'm really wiped out. So, and we went back to Chicago after the concert was over and went on with our lives. And that was when I dropped out of school, went to night school and all that. Married somebody else who lived in Oak Park for about a year, and then he wanted to go to New York State to be near his uncle. So we lived with them in Long Island for a couple months, and ended up leaving him and moving upstate to upstate New York, and got married a second time, and had my first baby. And when Morgan, my son, was about 2, we moved to 7 acres of land, and my father-in-law bought a trailer and had 2 trailers, one for him for weekends and one for us to live in. And that was rough living there. But I think it was about 23 then, and all of a sudden, one night, I'm sitting on the couch. My son was sleeping, and my husband used to sit at his desk and do paperwork and whatever because he owned his own business, doing furniture repairs. So I was watching TV, he's doing paperwork, and I had this feeling like, oh no, they're back. They're here, meaning the Greys. I always got that feeling like I was being watched. And so my husband suddenly stood up, and I said, are you going to bed? Because normally he'd just like, I'm hitting the hay and he'd go to bed. But this day he stood up and was acting strange. Like he wouldn't answer me. He was walking really stiff, like a robot, just slow and stiff in a daze. And I got scared. And I ran around shutting off the TV and the lights, and I followed him to bed. He laid down in bed, instantly was out unconscious, turned towards the wall, and I tried to wake him. He wouldn't move. It felt like a rock, frozen rock. I couldn't tell if he was breathing. But I knew the Greys were near. And I ran down the hall and I checked my son. He was the same way, stiff. Couldn't tell if he was breathing. And I got scared, and we didn't have 911 or anything back in those days, so I didn't know what to do. And I knew that if this was the Greys, there's nothing I could do about it. So I went and sat on the edge of the bed, terrified. And all of a sudden, the trees, we had a lot of trees on that lot, the 7 acres, and the trees just started blowing like a big wind came up. And then the next thing I see, a beam of light comes shooting down on over the top of the trailer. And there were no other houses around. I mean, we were private in the 7 acres. And so I see this light, and it lit up the entire inside of the trailer from above. It was so bright. And I'm standing there. I stood up, and I felt like a rat in a maze, being watched, being observed, and it was very scary. And I wanted to run down the hallway and shut off a nightlight, as if that was going to stop them from seeing me, right? But I did. I ran into the kitchen, and I checked the front door, and it was locked. And then I turned around, and I started to walk down the hallway, but I saw in front of me in the kitchen, it was a being that I had never seen or heard of before. He was only about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. And I'm standing there staring at this thing thinking, my God, he's shorter than my son. And this thing, it had a round white basketball head and 2 tiny black eyes in the front, and that's all I could tell. And then it was clothed in like a white robe from its neck to the ground, and you couldn't see hands or feet or anything. It was just like a big round head. And as I'm wondering what this is and why it's so short, the thing telepathically said to me, yes, but we are very, very old. And that scared the shit out. And I'm thinking, what? Hundreds? Thousands of years old? What? And I started to run down the hallway, but I turned around and my back was to the window in the kitchen. And I just kept staring at that thing. And next thing I know, I heard a jiggle in the front door knob, and the door opened, and in came about 4 or 5 of the gray beings that I had seen all my life. And they were moving in a weird way that I had never noticed before. Like their palms were facing the floor, but they would lift their arms up and push them out in front of them with their palms facing down. And their feet were moving the same way. It was almost like watching someone trying to push forward through Jell-O. Just the slow, weird motion. And then they stopped and turned and looked at me. And one of them went past me to the right, and I thought it was going down the hallway, to do something with my son or my husband. And so I'm still staring at the others. And next thing I knew, in a flash, this thing came from my right and quickly put itself right in front of my face. And I mean, I was like 4 or 5 inches away from it. And as I'm standing there, it's like he started playing mind games. And these beings do have personalities. It's like sometimes I felt like they were playing good cop, bad cop, where one would be friendly and one would be mean. Well, this one was being very mean. And he was trying to make me feel like I was a worthless dog who should be cowered on the floor at his feet. And I started to cry and feel worthless and low, like I should fall on the floor and cower in front of him. And then I said, no, I am not a dog. And I picked my head up and I looked right into his big black eyes. And as I'm staring at these giant football-shaped slanted eyes, I noticed inside them are these huge, even darker black pupils in the middle. So I'm like, whoa. My God, these things have pupils inside there. Because I'd never been quite that close to one face to face. And I noticed a horrible smell. And the only way I can describe it was urine mixed with sweet spices and vomit. And it made me want to throw up. That's what it smelled like. And then I started looking at its skin. And it had no hair on them. But I noticed that the skin had sort of like a texture to it. Have you ever seen like leather, like a piece of leather that has sort of a rough line texture in it?
Kind of like where it's almost cracked looking.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
it's not or smooth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what their skin looked like. Like there were just random few funny lines in their skin like that. And so I'm just observing these things, taking it in. And I was terrified, and I started praying, Lord, God, save me, help me, Jesus. And this thing said to me telepathically, yes, we know God too. And that scared me even more. I'm like, whoa, no help is coming. And the abduction continued. They took me out of the house and into the front yard. And I looked up and I could see the same kind of craft that I saw when I was 9 above our garage. Well, this was the same kind of a black circle above our trailer with the beam of light coming down. And I don't know what happened in the middle of that one, but I remember them bringing me back in at sunrise. Now, all this had started when my husband first went up and started acting weird and going to bed. It was 10 o'clock at night. So when they brought me back in, the sun was coming up. And I felt like my clothes were vacuum suctioned to me. You know how you do like those freezer bags where you suck out all the air?
Yeah, I know what you mean. We do that with some of our meat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so you know exactly what that looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
The plastic seals up against the the food. Well, that's how it felt like my clothes were sucked up against my whole body. My pants and my shirt and everything. And I felt like cold and clammy. And I'm being hovered down the hallway. And I heard, no, I've never told this to anyone before, but I'm going to tell you. Because I just feel like the whole experience needs to come out. And I just want to share it with you. What I heard as I'm being floated down the hallway was voices from above, like they were in the craft or something. It was like a woman and a man talking. And she says, oh, she's really nice. We should keep in touch with her. And I knew they were talking about me. And then next thing I know, I'm going down the hallway. And they stopped in my bedroom in the middle of the floor. They set me down on the floor. And then that vacuum suction feeling went away. And like my clothes fell away from my body like normal. And I'm standing there and I could hear something, but it was very, very faint. And the only way I could think of it was like take a giant metal mixing bowl, right? And put a big marble or a metal ball bearing in it and try rolling it around so that the ball bearing goes around in circles. That's what it sounded like, but it was so much more like a feeling, like a vibration. I could just barely hear it. And then the next thing I know, I hear helicopters. And as soon as I heard the helicopters, the trees started blowing like crazy again all around the house. And the beam of light went boom, shut right off. And I could tell that the craft left quickly. And I'm standing there listening, and 1, 2, 3, I heard 3 helicopters pass directly over my trailer, right where the craft had been sitting. And they were going on. They were following the thing in the direction of my best friend's house, who was a few miles down the road. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I need a witness. This can't keep happening. I have to tell somebody. And I was exhausted. And I just crashed into bed. Then I slept for like a good 12 hours. I woke up at like noon the next day. Or something longer than that. Because, it was like sunrise when I got there. Got back and my husband was gone. Like he had gone to work. Like nothing happened. And my son was okay. He was breathing and everything. And I had to pee really, really bad. Like I felt like my whole stomach was bloated. And I went in the bathroom and I sat down and I peed for like what felt like 10 minutes. And I'm sitting there, and as I look down, I'm going to tell you exactly what I saw. Right underneath my belly button was a circle that looked like a new scab. And it was about the size of a pencil eraser. And I'm looking at it going, what the heck is that? Where did that come from? And it didn't hurt at all. So I'm like messing with it. And I pulled at it and it came off, but when I pulled it up, there was like this long sheath, like a straw, a sheath of tissue that came out with it. And I'm pulling so, it was like 4 or 5 inches long. And I'm like, oh my God, what the hell is this? It was like somebody had stuck a straw or a giant needle down inside my belly. Below my belly button. And I laid it on a piece of tissue. I'm like, I gotta show somebody that. And then I went to wipe myself. And on the tissue paper, when I looked, there was this like thick, oily substance. And the weirdest part was that it was half a circle of bright yellow, oily liquid, and the other half was like an orangey amber sort of color. And they were touching right up against each other, but they weren't mixing. And I was freaking out, like, what on earth is this stuff? So I put that aside. I was going to save it. And then I'm sitting there going, this is crazy. Who am I going to tell? Nobody's going to believe me. I just don't even want to deal with this. So I threw it all away. And then I went and took care of my son. He was waking up and was doing dishes later. And I thought, oh my God, this is crazy. This has been going on all my life. I need proof. And I had my wet finger from, doing dishes. And I went over to the calendar and I poked my finger on the calendar and left a wet spot. And then I circled that day in a red marker. I said, I'm going to remember that day. That's the night I was abducted. Because I had never, kept records or notes or anything my entire life. I just remembered it. And I still have that calendar to this day. And so I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't want to talk about it. So I called my best friend. And I just wanted a nice, normal conversation. I just wanted life to be normal. And it didn't turn out that way. I asked her how she was doing, and she said, oh my God, you won't believe what happened this morning. Just as the sun was coming up, I heard the dog barking. She went outside of her house, looked out the back door, and she didn't believe in this stuff. But she saw a UFO hovering above the trees. She said there was what looked like a giant gray owl sitting on a tree branch underneath the UFO. And it had big black eyes. She's trying to figure this out. What is that? And all of a sudden, she said she heard 3 helicopters coming. And that UFO took off like a shot in the other direction. When she saw those helicopters, Brandon, they were military. 1, 2, 3 coming from the direction of my house.
The black helicopters.
black or army green. I don't know. I didn't see them. All I did was hear them when they went over my trailer. When they got to her house, she saw that they were military. And I said, oh my God, I'm thinking to myself, there's my witness. My best friend is now my witness. But I still couldn't tell her. But I tried to tell her, but she was like, what are you talking about? All she was into was just what she went through, and she's telling me how she called her father, and her father said, don't bother calling the military or the police. They're not going to do anything. And so she just kind of forgot about it. Now, years later, I had left my husband, got involved with someone else, had another baby, broke up with him, and I had 2 little kids now in this apartment and down near Accord, New York. And my son was 5 by then, and my baby was little, maybe 6 months old. And Morgan was about to start school. And one night, I'm sitting there watching TV, and I suddenly got really tired. Kids were in bed already. I got really tired, and I just dragged myself to bed and shut off the TV. Crashed, fell asleep. Next thing I knew, I woke up, and I heard a voice say, go to your son, he needs you. So I jumped out of bed, I go run into his room, and he was laying there in bed on top of his pillow, like, you normally lay down and only your head's on the pillow, not your shoulders. Well, he was laying with his head and his shoulders all the way up on the pillow, and the blankets were tucked up to his chest, neatly folded down straight across his chest. And there was nothing on the sheet, and there was nothing on the pillowcase, but his entire face, his nose was running bright red blood all out his nose, across his mouth. I couldn't get him to wake up, and I didn't have a phone at that point. I ran downstairs and pounded on my neighbor's door, asked her to come up and call for help. Well, she was acting really strange. She came up, didn't say a word the entire time. She grabbed a chair from my dining room, sat it next to the head of his bed, and sat there like a zombie. And I'm running around her, going to the bathroom, getting washcloths and trying to clean him up. There was no blood on the pillowcase or the sheet. It was only on him and his pajama top. And the next day I took him to a clinic, and they did an x-ray. They couldn't find any reason for the cause of all that blood. And my neighbor I told her, go get help again, and she stood up like a zombie, walked down to her apartment, and never called for help. So all these times I felt very, very alone in all of this. And, it took me so many years to be able to talk about it at all.
Yeah. Talking about these things are never easy for anyone.
No. But the weird thing was, after the abduction, when my son was 2, and heard the helicopters, shortly after that, I called my father in Chicago, and I just wanted to hear his voice and stuff. And him and my stepmother and my sister were all living together. And they said, isn't it about time you got saved? Because they had all become born-again Christians, 3 of them. And I said, you know what? It is. I need God. So at that point is when I accepted the Lord and got baptized and got saved. And I have to tell you that after that, I was never abducted again. I'm sorry, I'm getting congested. I was never abducted that I remember after that.
Mm-hmm.
After getting saved. But my son was at least once down there, and after we moved up here near Albany, New York, he says that he has memories of abductions as an older child and all that. here at this property because I've been here almost 38 years.
Is his
So,
memories anything similar to what yours are?
oh yeah. Yeah. When I had found him with blood on him, I had asked him the next day when he finally woke up, I said, "What happened last night?" And he said, "Well, there was a skeleton man in my room." He didn't know any other way to describe it. Skinny, great being. He called it a skeleton man. But he says that our neighbor's son was his age too. He said that that little boy was in his room with him. And they were both taken out of the house. And man, I got so mad. I looked up at the sky and I said, it's one thing, it's bad enough for you to take me my whole life against my will, but you better stay away from my children. I was pissed. It's like I could deal with it for myself well enough, but not when, you feel totally helpless when your child is taken.
Weird question, but do you happen to know what blood types you guys are?
Oh my God, that's another thing. My friend Murray from Canada, he's the one who told me the connection of O negative. And yes, Murray and I are both O negative.
I'm going to say the type O negative is something that seems to be a connection between abduction victims.
That's one thing I wanted to tell you. Thanks for reminding me. Yes, Murray up in Canada and me are both O negative. Yeah, there is something to that for real. And I guess it's genetic. It's got to be, right? He's got Scottish heritage and I do too. Like I'm part Scottish, Irish, and English, and Welsh and all that. And he's like mostly Scottish and half some kind of Canadian Indian. But yeah, we're both O negative, and I have heard of that connection, which is so bizarre.
It seems like, because I think it's like the universal donors, like that
Yeah.
they can use that blood for anything. So I'm wondering if that's not part of why they do it, because it can be used for anybody else. Because they use it for like blood donations. That's like, if you're donating blood, they want O negative because it could be used for anyone else.
Wow, isn't that crazy though? Jeez. Yeah. And I can't swear 100% that that's all they're in it for is genetic manipulation or whatever, but I've always felt that it had to be something like that.
Yeah.
My parents were involved, and I have this alien half-sister, what the heck? It's just bizarre.
From what I'm reading right now, it says only 7% of the population is type O negative.
7%? Wow. That's lower than I thought, but wow.
Yeah, so there could be reasonings as to why, again, if they use that as the universal blood for humans, and if they're doing things to where they're making hybrids, because obviously the one said it was your sister.
Yeah.
Maybe they need type O negative blood to use for these hybrids.
Maybe that's the only way they can make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird. It's an interesting question.
But
wow.
So when was your last abduction, do you think it was? Did you remember?
The one that I remember being taken last was the one I think when I was 23.
Okay.
Yeah. Before I got saved. But the weird thing is, once I finally started talking to my boyfriend Steve about it, he was scared. Like, he knew I was telling the truth, and he was like, "Do you think they're gonna come back? Are they gonna take me?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't think so, because it's been a long time." So one night, the last experience I remember was laying in bed with Steve, and he was asleep. And something woke me up, and I looked over next to him. Between the bed and the wall was a great being standing there looking at him, just staring right down at him. And as soon as it realized that I was looking at it, that I was awake, it moved its head in this really creepy way, like towards me, and stared at me with the big eyes. And I literally just went, "Oh," it's you again. And I fell back to sleep. So that was the last interaction that I remember.
I've always thought it was strange when you hear of people being abducted, but their partner in bed next to them wasn't.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and I mean, you mentioned like people try to explain it away, psychologists try to explain it away as being like trauma cover or whatever. I was never molested as a child, ever. Neither was my sister. So that's not true.
Yeah. So
I don't believe.
I can see it maybe in some cases, but there's far too many. Why would the
Yes.
brain, like we mentioned earlier, why would the brain of all these other people that have experienced this all manifest the same exact thing?
Right.
That doesn't add up.
Not at all. When we're all telling basically the same story, come on. I mean, it's not like one person seeing a ghost and one person seeing a bear and, whatever. We're all seeing his grace.
Look at the time frame. Like yours was, did you say 19? The first one, 1963.
3 was my first one. Yeah.
You didn't hear about abductions really back then, not into the sense of what you do now. So
Not at all.
to have that experience and that's what you remember from then.
Yeah.
You didn't have the Travis Walton story. That wasn't until the late 70s.
No,
And
not at all. Uh-uh.
a lot of people try and discredit Travis and that whole thing, and they use his basis of abduction as a template. They like, since his came out and became popular, then everyone started having these abduction stories, and they're all very similar to Travis's. So they use his version. They say people are using him as an excuse, like he implemented that whole experience into these people. I was like, why would he originate that? And like, why?
Exactly. Exactly. And why would people say they went through the same thing? Like I went through it before that Travis Walton story.
Yeah.
And wow, it's so crazy. But the first book that I ever read about abductions was back in the early 80s, maybe. I think it was Whitley Strieber's first book.
Yeah.
And the weird thing was, yeah, Communion, that's right, I forgot. His abductions and where he lived in his cabin or whatever wasn't that far from where I lived in that trailer. Crumville, New York, near the Ashokan Reservoir. And I think Whitley Strieber lived somewhere in that general area where he had his abductions.
I have an interview with someone that I think was actually from that area too.
Oh, yeah.
And when he was a kid, he thought they were ghosts at first until he saw the cover of, I don't remember if it was Communion or what, but it was the first time he'd actually seen like the gray alien. And then he realized he realized that what he was seeing wasn't ghost.
Right.
But he talked about how he got levitated out of his bed and down the stairs.
Okay.
And there's just so many similarities between people's memories.
Yeah.
The levitation, the floating out of bed, the floating out of a window, like all that stuff is very, very common in abduction stories.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Like a lot of my stories are very similar to other people's, except for those weird robotic things talking to each other and stuff like that is unique to mine that I've never heard anyone say, but I'm curious about stuff like that. And you're right, the Communion book cover is what caught my attention in a bookstore one day. And I said, oh, God, that's what I've been seeing all my life. And I had to read that book. It was like, oh, I'm not alone. That's how I felt.
It's strange for me because I saw this yesterday and I've seen it before, but are you familiar who Aleister Crowley is? He was like the Satanist guy from, I think, like the 1920s or 30s or something.
Oh, yeah. Horrible guy.
He had a picture that he drew of the entity that he was speaking with, and that was the first picture that looked like a gray alien. If you look at the picture that he drew of what he claimed that he was conversing with.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It has the big bulbous head, and it's a very typical looking gray. It doesn't have the big black eyes, but everything else about it looks like a gray alien.
Wow. I never knew that.
And this was obviously like 100 years ago now.
Yeah.
So it's strange that some people credit him for starting the whole gray thing,
Oh, wow.
but
Really?
like I said, I don't necessarily buy into that. But if he thinks he was talking to demons,
Yes.
and now you have these things coming on here, like years later, people call them gray aliens and everything else. Like a lot of people start to lean now, thinking that aliens are just demons.
That's what I was just going to say. Yes, a lot of Christians do say, oh, they just dismiss them as demons. And I'm like, I used to fight with people about that because, like, I've been there. I've seen them. They're real physical beings. You can touch them. They're right there. They're physical. I'm like, and now I think, well, maybe they're demons inhabiting these bodies. They're cloned bodies, And I even had the thought in watching like cattle mutilations and stuff. What if they're cutting out these bits of leather and growing it to make these gray suits because they all look alike?
Mm-hmm.
That was my thought because of the way the skin looked with the cowhide kind of lines in it. That's just my theory. Who knows? It could be way off.
You should. I don't know if you're familiar. I interviewed him. It's not out yet, but L.A. Marzulli. He is. He might be someone you want to look into as far as his recent books and videos coming out, because you just mentioned cattle mutilations and stuff.
Yeah.
They have some connections to things in there.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I have seen him on Facebook, and I just became Facebook friends with Karen Wilkinson, but I haven't read her book yet.
Yeah, she's added me on there too. She's been making the rounds on other podcasts, and no disrespect to anyone. If they want to come on my show, they can, but I don't actively try and find people that are always on everyone else's show, because I want to give the people that don't get a chance to speak their opportunity.
Well, I appreciate that, because I wanted to give you the opportunity. The only one who's ever given me a real chance to tell my story was Brent Swanser, who writes. He just, writes supernatural stories, and he's interested in true stories. So he did a little article on mine that got, good results, and there were, some interesting positive responses to it.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a few years ago, and I haven't had anyone, let me talk to them about it in a while.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to let you come on here and share your story with me.
Yeah, it's been good. I also, I had asked God a few years ago why I had to go through all these experiences. And he said to me, I gave you a sound mind, even an extra sound mind, so that you can be a testimony of it. So I really believe I'm supposed to talk about it and, share my experiences. And I hope that it can help somebody else not feel alone.
Mm-hmm. That's,
maybe they can relate to it.
That's my whole goal, is to allow people to listen to this. So even if they don't want to come on the show, but they hear what others have experienced, so they don't feel like they're alone. Because
yeah,
I've never experienced what you experienced, but I have went through something before to where it's like you can't talk about it. And
right.
I didn't like feeling that way, and I don't think other people should feel that way. So if I can help other people and help my own self while doing it too, because I enjoy listening to what other people have experienced, in the sense of I'm not alone.
Yeah, so do I.
It's like mutually beneficial for both.
I think so. And the wild thing is, like, I've had so many other experiences. Like, if I ever wrote a book, it would have to be called Of God and Aliens, because you can't leave God out of my story, or aliens.
No.
And the Bigfoot too, it's like, wow. I've had some crazy experiences, but it's all real.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can get back in touch again sometime in the future, and you can talk more about those.
So, yeah, there is more to talk about.
Well, Laura,
that would be cool.
I do appreciate you coming on here and sharing that with me. I know it's not easy to talk about, so I know it takes a lot out of people to share, but I do truly appreciate you.
I appreciate you letting me. That's been awesome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Not a problem. Is there anything you'd like to let the audience know before we close out?
God is real. Trust in him, seek only him, and you'll be okay.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for talking with me today. I appreciate it. And I want to say thanks to everyone out there listening. But we're going to roll it out. So, yep. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.